All right, everybody. Well, I want to say a very warm welcome. We are very quickly moving through this boot camp, which is so exciting to see. It's been really an honor to dig in and get to know, what you guys are doing and how this has been impacting you. And I'm so thrilled to hear that so many of you have shared this has been a really great experience and there's been a ton of learning. And even if it's just one or two takeaways, in between weeks, that we're seeing really great progress. And as we're in our focus of self-management, which is understanding the mind-body connection, which is understanding how to physically manage our emotional response to stress and anxiety and depression and trauma, things like that, that we cannot avoid. Instead of reacting to those emotions or reacting to toxic or negative thinking, that we are learning tools to help manage through that effectively, wisely, and especially with other people. So this week's focus is developing self-control. And I think sometimes that term self-control can be a negative, like, oh, I don't want to talk about self-control. And for me, it's like, oh, well, self-control equates to managing my eating habits and managing my sleeping habits and doing healthy things for me that I know I should do, but I don't always do. And that's an essence of self-control. When you apply that term through the lens of EQ, self-control is a result of emotional intelligence, right? And it's not well, all of a sudden now I'm completely in self-control of my eating habits. I don't ever have to worry about it again. That is not the case. Self-control is a muscle that you're going to develop and flex and learn from and grow from. And it's a constant changing thing. And so I'm really excited to introduce Patrick James to you today. Some of you know him through his time with success coaching, but as he and I have been developing our relationship, Patrick just has so much to offer us today. So I'm really excited to have him here. So Patrick, thank you so much for giving your time to us today.
Wow, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
I really have enjoyed our conversations leading up to this, and let me just kind of give a little background of just kind of who I am and kind of where I'm coming from when I look through the lens of self-control. Um, First off, you can see the bottom left. I spent a year at Deloitte, one of the world's largest consulting firms. I was a management consultant there for just over a decade, doing large implementations, a lot of strategy work with companies. Um, Spent after that, it's been about 10 years working with startups, mostly in establishing customer success uh, organizations, as well as a lot of implementation services and really working up and down the customer journey of all different aspects of that. And then I became a chief operating officer at Blackstone, and it was the first time I wasn't client facing. It was internal role. I was there at Blackstone for many, many years, and then became an executive at ADP, overseeing implementations and a lot of work within the customer journey there. ADP, one of the world's largest payroll, actually HR, human capital management software companies in the world. And then I'm also was a professor at San Francisco State University, teaching management information systems at their graduate level for their MBA program.
Mm.
And I founded Inroad. It's my company. Currently doing that, working very closely with Success Coaching, who does customer success management certification and training. Um, the program that I teach for success coaching is management essentials. So I teach managers how to manage. And so it gets into a lot of things around the EQ skills and things that you need to be doing as a manager, not just the tactical day by day management of people, but really about how to be a manager. And that's really where Inroad is the sweet spot. Plus, also, I do a lot of consulting around the customer journey and project remediation, project turnarounds, or client turnarounds where that relationships have gone south. Outside, I'm an endurance athlete. I do a lot of Ironman triathlons, ultra marathons, and so that goes very closely with what we're going to be talking about today around self-control, so self-management.
I love that. Thanks for that background. And I mean, I'm just thrilled that you're here. It's funny that you're teaching at San Fran. I looked at the customer success degree there not that long ago and have thought too about maybe looking at teaching at a university level down the road. And so I love that that's what you're doing. Um, let's start by helping us understand, why is EQ something that you're passionate about?
Well, I think it goes back to really being self-aware, knowing that, hey, there's, how am I feeling? Being able to check in, we can get into mindfulness, but I think that, it's such an important part, especially because in my work and working with managers, it is absolutely an important part of how you manage others, how you manage yourself. A lot of times I always tell managers, like, before you try to manage others, manage yourself. And, and if you're not managing yourself, then you start to stumble and trip over all kinds of different emotions, thoughts, feelings that interfere with managing others.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. So let's shift into our topic today, which is developing self-control. I thought we could begin with maybe a story from you, Patrick, on a time in your career, maybe where you lacked self-control in a certain area. What, tell us about what occurred, what did you learn, and how has that contributed to the path that you're on today?
Yeah, yeah. I think, for me, you know, great question. And before I give the story, I want to just kind of set a baseline, if that's
Yeah, of
okay for us. Because,
course.
for me, when I look at self-control, and one of the things I talk to those that I coach and I teach is, first off, self-control for me is just really about regulating your emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors in kind of when you face temptations or those impulses. So it's really being able to regulate the emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Well, for me, I I'm a kind of a very practical, pragmatic person because I'm like, okay, that seems a little academic for me. For me, I break it down into, it's really, what do I think? What do I say? What do I do? So what do I think? What do I say? And then my actions. What do I do? And so that's, for me, that's self-control. Like, how do I regulate that? And so when I think of, to your question about, for me, where do I have a tendency to, or I've in the past stumbled? For me, a lot of times that is, again, for what I say.
Mm,
So I I'm opinionated. And so for me, sometimes it's like, okay, where's that ability to regulate
mm,
what I'm saying? And so it goes back to, okay, well, that's usually in meetings. And when it gets intense, when it gets fiery, and in being able to kind of ground myself. And there's been times where I've let emotions pour out. I'm angry or I feel threatened. The whole parasympathetic nerve, fight or flight,
yep.
the vagus nerve. And so you're just like the sympathetic, parasympathetic nerve. And you're like, okay, well, for me, a lot of times it is to fight. And it's just like, wait, I got to sit and understand. I got to control that. I have to be aware of that. And so there's not just one situation where I can say, to answer your question, where I've
Mm,
said, okay, I've lashed out, or I felt threatened. Like, okay, this is my idea. I've been championing it. Stopping and going, why? Why do I feel threatened? why do I feel, and basically not regulating that. And I think that that
Mm,
happens a lot with most
yeah.
people. But for me, when I kind of go break it down into the three buckets, what do I think? What do I say? What do I do? For
Mm,
me, historically, numerous meetings where I'm just like, okay, how can I regulate what I say?
I love that. So in those moments when you feel yourself triggered, and we use that term triggered, right? You're triggered in a meeting because you feel defensive or you feel like you need to fight, whatever. What are you thinking in your head to take that thought captive and ask why and shift your mentality?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what, you know, I I love to read. And I would say one of the books that really made an impact on me was Crucial Conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that's is a fantastic book. There's workbooks that go along with it. Um, but there was one sentence, and sometimes you read a book, thousands and thousands of words, but there's one sentence that really lands. And the one that landed with me in that book was, what do I want?
Mm,
And it's just to a point. Sometimes it's like latching onto it like it's a mantra. And when I can feel my blood pressure rising, and I feel kind of like I just sense my body, just really changing, or my patterns changing. It's like repeating to myself, what do I want?
mm,
And it's where I lead off of that is saying, okay, well, what is the short-term goal and what's my long-term goal? Am I going to get short-term satisfaction? Sure. I make my point. Or I look at it and go, okay, I get, I wouldn't say revenge. Revenge is, but usually like you're stating your point or you're
yeah.
showing that person's wrong. And you go, okay, great. I got short-term satisfaction out of that. But long-term, that's not satisfaction because I've probably made an enemy. I have set the team back. I've set let's say the client relationship back. And it's like, well, what I really want is a better relationship with this client or a better relationship with you know, uh, this other team, this
Yeah.
internal team member. I want a long-term, good relationship. Well, if I'm going to get short-term satisfaction out of lashing out, yeah, maybe make me feel good for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, but the cost of really what I want long-term, and that's long-term satisfaction or long-term goals and objectives.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's back to the answer to your question. It's just like, okay, what do I want
Mm.
in this conversation, and how do I want it to go? And I need to put those things aside and say, what's the greater objective?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's also, it can be, what do I want in the circumstances that I'm in, the people that I'm speaking with, the outcome of the meeting. But I think there's a bigger question that you could also say is, what do I want of myself? What do I want other people to experience when they work with me? What kind of
Mhm.
reputation have I created that I want to continue to be faithful to? What are my morals and values that I've committed to staying true to? And how do those, right, involve my response in these moments? So I'm curious because you're teaching managers how to be great managers. I'm looking for practical tips or takeaways that you can share with Jeff today and anyone who's going to listen to this recording later. When you feel that heart rate increase, when you feel your chest tighten, when you feel that fight or flight response,
Yeah,
what are you physically doing to help yourself in those moments?
yeah. I would say in that moment, first it's being aware. It's really being aware, like, hey, I'm starting to have being anxious, feeling like I'm threatened.
Mm,
And so, first off, it's just awareness, like, hey, I'm feeling this. Now it's why.
yeah.
Now, it's also doing the after action review with yourself and going, okay, well, why? Because like, I mean, deep down, you know, hey, I kind of screwed up here. I kind of blew this relationship. So doing an after action, we talk about doing after action reviews in business all the time, especially, you know, in my world of customer success, you feel it. You do after action reviews. And so do it with yourself and some self-reflection and looking at it and saying, okay, well, why? Well, most of the time, it's ego.
Mm,
I mean, research and a lot of even around crucial conversations, it's like, and so for me, to answer to your question, one of the things I looked at, and I kind of another mantra back to kind of when I'm in the heat of a moment, and I know this is going to be a heated conversation, the tools and techniques I use is, okay, what do I want?
mm,
And then there's kind of a saying I've gone into is in this is around self-control is that be more concerned about finding the right answer than being viewed as being right and knowing everything.
mm,
And when I heard that from another speaker, Tom Bayou, does a lot of really good work and around um, emotional intelligence and such. But it's really about when I kind of sat with that is it's like, wait, are you more concerned about your ego, about being viewed as knowing everything or being right? Or is there like, oh, I want to find the right answer. And so when you go into the mindset of, hey, I want to find the right answer and having that control, it takes the responsibility off of yourself, of your ego,
mm.
your status, and going, hey, I just want to find out the right answer.
Yeah.
And deep down going, you know what? I'm probably wrong. So that when you're in the heat of the moment, you're kind of saying, okay, is this my ego? Or am I just trying to be viewed as being right? Or is this really the right answer? And so therefore, like the level of threat. And so when I worked with my managers and kind of that, where you kind of go, it almost takes it off of you, takes the pressure off of you and saying, look, I don't have to be right. The question I have to say is am I searching for the right answer?
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the elements that we've been digging into for the last couple of weeks in this focus of self-management, right, is that you identified, you feel your blood pressure rising. One of the things we've talked about that will continue to develop is understanding our body's response to stress, anxiety, fear, depression, all of the above. And so
Yeah,
the method of understanding the mind body connection and how your thoughts influence emotions that drive behavior, when you know how your body is communicating to you that something is off, right? To be mindful, be present, be thoughtful and aware as you talk about, because if you're not in tune with your body, if you've not figured out how your body is telling you something is wrong, then in that moment when emotions are high and you're not listening, nothing's triggering you, that's when we get out of control, right? And so I think to
yeah,
your point too, it's being mindful, but I'm going to back us up a step and also say, if you have not figured out your body and how your body tells you it's stressed, we have to start there,
yeah,
because by the time we get to the point where you're in the meeting and you're stressed, if you don't start here and you get here, it's almost too late to backtrack or to be mindful to prevent something from happening.
yeah, absolutely. And back to your other question is, you know, just kind of tools and techniques I use that have gotten me over this hurdle. And it was a hurdle. Um, and also then, you know, talking with those that I coach and such is I practice active listening. Now, again, and I'll even take it to another step. Is it, so there's a lot of um, research and they talk about active listening and the importance of active listening, and that if you're listening to respond, you're going to be much more on the defensive
Yes.
versus active listening. I'm here to understand. So for someone like me, who loves, you know, kind of just being in it and just kind of has had a used to having tendency to not have a
Mm.
lot of self-control in how I respond. But I take it almost to an extreme and I call it aggressive listening.
Mm.
And that gets me into the mindset of I'm not just actively listening to what you're saying, but I'm an aggressive. I'm gonna be like hanging on your words. Everything you're saying in this meeting, not to be defensive, but because I'm curious, which goes back to what you had said previously, which is very key, and we haven't got into it, is knowing what your values are,
Yeah.
knowing what your beliefs are, what are your principles. And one of the big values for me is curiosity. I value curiosity. Curiosity is about learning and about, and with learning comes mistakes.
Mhm.
But since that is a deep value of mine, and I've spent a lot of time really, really wording that, documenting and just wordsmithing it of why I value curiosity, so that when I'm sitting there and I'm in a heated conversation, I'm not sitting there listening to respond in order to debate, or I'm sitting there going, well, what can I learn?
Mm.
And therefore, my ego is, or anything where I may feel defensive
Yeah.
is on the shelf.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm curious. And so for me, it's like active listening is good, but I'm like, hey, this is going to be heated. I'm going to be aggressive in how I listen.
Mm. I really love that. We know Bob London is the kind of voice around active listening and we adore him. But I love this term because for me, it changes of active listening to I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm thinking and I'm coming up with questions and I'm gleaning to it's almost an internal lean in to be aggressive and to really commit yourself to, like you said, hanging on every word of the other person. I really love that. Before we wrap the recording, I just want to say or ask you, what are you sharing with your managers in your management class, right? What if someone doesn't know where to start or they've struggled with self-control and they're not really sure how to get a grip on it? What's a practical piece of takeaway advice that you can offer somebody who might be really struggling with this part?
Um, for me, um, place to start. For me, I always like, I love to read. And, I think of places, well, first off, a class, boot camp like this, great place to start. Fantastic. I think what you guys talk about here, and I've looked at, watched several of the past recordings. I'm like, this is a great place to start and to be. So I would say here where you're at.
Well, thanks
Okay.
for
So that's the
that.
first, this is a great place to start. I would say, but for me, I also back to reading is I like Mel Robbins' work around, the 5 second rule, the high
Yes.
five habit,
Yes.
which
I
goes
love that.
into what I talked about earlier about thinking. We've been talking about what you're saying, but dealing with negative thoughts and really how you break patterns of negative thoughts, or doing, thought stopping and replacement, such as, okay, I'm not good, and not having self-control around what you think
Yeah.
and being able to interrupt that. I think that there's a lot of work. I would even say things around, you can even go to a different extreme if Mel Robbins is a little too soft for you. You're like, you can go David Goggins and go, all in, and then, his book, You Can't Hurt Me. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
to the other
It
extreme.
is. Absolutely.
And to go, look, there's thought stopping and replacement. There's, where he talks about the cookie jar. And so for me, I kind of go, hey, that's a good place where it's like sometimes negative thoughts come in and I go, I've got a cookie jar of these things where when like I feel like I'm being self-negative, that I can tap in and go, you know what, you did this. You
Hmm.
turn this project around. You turn this client relationship around. You got this.
Yeah. I mean,
And
we've talked a lot about morals and values. We've talked a lot about capturing an intrusive or negative thought when it happens, so that we can ask, why am I feeling this way? Why is this thought coming? And in order to get rid of the thought,
Mm-hmm.
you can't ignore it, you can't bury it, you can't put it on hold. You have to replace it with something positive. And so
Yeah.
that's where the I am statement that we've been working
Oh,
on and developing, right? Maybe this image vision board, or positive. I have quotes all over my office, right, that help keep my mind in that right place to replace those intrusive thoughts with. I think what I want to wrap is by saying you have to be intentional about it.
yeah.
You can't just lean back and expect that, oh, well, I read this book and it was really great, or I listened to that podcast and it was really helpful. And you just think that your mental or subconscious will absorb it and change it. That's not how the human body works. And so in order to make different choices in the future, you have to be intentional with your time to build and stretch and flex the muscles necessary to get the behavior you're looking for. It doesn't just happen.
That,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. Well, we're going to end the recording here. We're going to keep the call going. But to those of you who are listening after the fact, thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to get to know Patrick, and you should, reach out to him on LinkedIn because he's a great resource. So thanks again, Patrick.
Oh, thank you.